If you ride long enough on a motorcycle, you'll have a few close calls. You know, our mission as riders is to reduce the number of close calls through road strategy, and then to have the road skills to handle a problem when or if it does arise. So I thought I'd reflect back on a close call that I had several years ago. We'll ride out, we'll take a look at the actual location, we'll ride through it again, and we'll see what we can learn from this story. So I used to work for one of the major airlines, and I commuted every day back and forth on a motorcycle. And to be honest, the best part of my day was that ride back and forth to work. So I could have taken the straight route on the interstate, lined up with all the other people just trying to get to work, or I could take the longer, curvier route to work, which usually took a little bit longer. I was on a motorcycle, so of course I took that longer, curvier route to and from work, even if it meant having to leave the house a little earlier every morning. So I'd been riding the same route for 3 or 4 years, and I knew where every bump was on the road. I knew where the corners were that cars would sometimes cut short and kick up gravel onto the road. So if there ever was a road that a rider could get complacent on, it was this one, and I could have been that rider. But as a rider, if we don't keep our head in the game, at some point we're going to get caught, and on this day it would have been me. But even if we know that stretch of road like the back of our hand, even if we've ridden that same road day after day, there can always be something that can change the equation. There's one section of this road that reminds me of a section of the track at Laguna Seca, the world famous corkscrew at Laguna Seca. Man, it's a shame that MotoGP no longer races here, because I really thought this was a cool track. There have been a whole lot of famous overtakes on this small section of the track. So every day I look forward to riding through my own mini corkscrew on the way to and from work. And on this set of curves, there's a left and a right curve that leads to a decline in elevation, similar to the corkscrew at the MotoGP track. It was one of these sections where cars would often cut the corner short and they would kick gravel out onto the road. It was also a section of road where it was common to have a car coming in the opposite direction, and they'd cut the corner short the other way and they'd move over into your lane. But what happened on this day was not something I had ever seen or really even considered a possibility. And that brings us to an important road strategy technique that came into play here. When we ride on the edge of traction, when we ride on the edge of our skill set, or if you're a really skilled rider and you have the ability to ride on the edge of your motorcycle's abilities, if you do that on public streets, no matter how skilled you are, there will always be a what if that will eventually catch you. So had I been pretending to be Marc Marquez on this day, rounding the corkscrew at Laguna Seca, and been riding at the limits of my ability, I would have crashed on this day. In fact, it was a combination of several road strategies and road skills that avoided a crash this day. So let's ride back through that now famous Fort Worth corkscrew. We'll analyze what I did and how my road skills and road strategy avoided a really bad situation. So this is the start of the curve. The curve by itself is fairly tight by Texas curve standards. We don't have a whole lot of curves here. Mostly we have wide open straight roads with little elevation, but this curve by Texas standard is pretty sharp. You have some vision around the curve that's obscured partially by those trees that you see on the left-hand side of the road. At this point, one of the biggest hazards is that decline that's right after the next curve. Notice as we proceed slowly through that curve how the limit point of the curve is moving closer to me. So the point that I can see furthest up the road is moving closer to me. So if you want to know more about limit points, do a YouTube search on MCrider limit points, and I've got a video on that topic that'll teach you more about what limit points are and how you can use them as a rider. But one of our goals is to be able to stop the motorcycle within the limits that we can see clearly up the road. So this is not the time to be on the throttle, because the distance I can see up the road is further reduced by every foot I move forward up the road. So it's getting closer to me. So as we move further up the road and into the next curve, the hill becomes less of a factor, but the trees on the right side of the road really obscure our vision through this particular corner. This brings another important road strategy into play. So I could move further towards the center of the road so that I could see further through the corner. But I also knew that this was a section of the road where cars frequently cut this corner, and I don't want to be too far towards the center of the lane in case that happens. So I split the difference, trying to maximize my view around the corner, but giving me some cushion if a car comes up cutting that corner and getting into my lane. So right now my vision is pretty tight to this area on the road. So I want to see anything that's out of the ordinary as soon as possible, and by looking right here, it gives me the furthest look up the road that's available to me at this point in time. So let's move slowly through this and continue watching our limit point. So looking right here on the road, knowing that if something suddenly appears in the furthest distance we can see up the road, that we have to be able to get the motorcycle to a stop in that distance. So it was right about here that I noticed something wasn't quite right about this corner. Remember, we have to see the hazard, we have to recognize it's a hazard, we have to decide what to do, and then we have to perform the action all in a very short period of time. All of that is a part of our total braking distance. So what I saw when I got to this point of the road was a side view of the front bumper of a large SUV. So it took me a minute to process what I was seeing. So a driver decided at this point in the road to make a U-turn. You see how narrow this road is? There's nowhere to go inside of the lane because you're running into the trees. There's a drop-off and a barbed wire fence right to the outside of the lane. And I was approaching a large SUV that was diagonal to the road and covering the entire road. I'm not totally sure what my speed was at this point, but to the best of my memory, I think it was similar to what I'm doing here. I'm guessing 25 to 30 miles per hour. In this situation, the only option I had was to stop, but it was complicated a little more because I was at full lane coming around this corner. But the rest of what happened was all on autopilot for me. I don't remember thinking about what I should do. I just did it. I immediately began to straighten the motorcycle up. I pushed on that right hand grip, bringing the motorcycle up and out of the curve. At the same time, I squeezed in the clutch and began applying the front and rear brakes in a progressive manner as I shifted the bike down into first gear and had it in first gear as I came to a stop. I do remember applying the front brakes in a progressive manner and wondering if I was going to get the bike stopped in time. Progressive pressure on the front brakes is important because it allows the weight of the motorcycle to shift forward, providing more traction and giving you more braking power. Had I reached out and grabbed that front brake, it would have locked up the tire and I would have crashed. Had I locked up the rear brake while I had the motorcycle leaned over, probably would have slipped out from under me and I likely would have crashed. Many riders in this situation would have done one of those two things, and then many of them would have gone on to brag to their buddies and say they had to lay the motorcycle down because there was no other choice to avoid the crash. For those riders, I say causing your own crash to avoid a crash makes no sense and it's not a viable option. Learn to ride your motorcycle. So once I had the motorcycle straight and began braking, I got the motorcycle to a stop. I came to a stop and I'm staring right at the face of a shocked lady who is realizing for the first time the intelligence of her choice to make a U-turn at that spot in the road. She was looking at me through the window and she was mouthing, I'm sorry. And I was thinking, get that boat out of the road because someone is rounding this corner soon behind me, and I didn't want to be trapped between her SUV and whoever was coming up behind me. So I watched as she wiggled this SUV back and forth in the road and eventually got it turned around, and I'm watching in the mirror ready to dump my bike and run off the road in case a car came up behind me. I think I was probably more scared at this point waiting for her to finish this U-turn because I was at the complete mercy of anybody that was coming up behind me, and I didn't like being in that situation. So I tell you this story not to make you think I'm some amazing rider. On this day, at this time, for this incident, I avoided a crash, but I owe it all to road strategy and road skills, and those are available to every rider. You know, my road strategy kept me riding at a pace that I could get the motorcycle to a stop within the distance I could see. My road strategy allowed me to look through that corner and see that SUV as soon as possible. And also, I had the motorcycle positioned in my lane to be able to see around that corner as well as I possibly could, also giving me the ability to get the motorcycle to a stop. And at that point, my road strategy for this corner was complete. But remember, we can never predict what other drivers are going to do on the road. And in this case, it was something pretty dumb. That's where my road skills came into play. And remember, I said that my braking skills on this corner were on autopilot. They truly were. And yeah, I was able to walk you step by step what I did on the motorcycle to get it to a stop. It's because I practiced this scenario frequently, emergency braking in a corner. As an instructor, I did this every time I taught a new rider class because it was one of the exercises, and I would demonstrate the technique to students. I know exactly what I did under stress in this situation because I do it exactly the same way when I practice it on a parking lot, when I'm practicing with the field guide, all by myself in some high school parking lot where I'm not under the stress of a potential crash. So I talk a lot about road skills and road strategy on MCrider. In fact, they're the pillars of everything I try to teach here on MCrider. And this story is the perfect example of how it can save your life. It certainly saved me from a serious crash on this day. I hope you'll consider becoming a member of MCrider and practicing with the field guide. I've got an exercise in the field guide that will help you practice emergency braking in a corner. It'll teach you the technique so you can practice this on your own and be prepared should you ever find yourself in the same situation. It really could save your life. So those exercises are just words on a smartphone, though, if you don't practice. In addition to the field guide, you'll get access to members on the forums, experienced riders and riding instructors who will help you answering questions about the field guide or techniques or, anything in the world of motorcycling. We've got many riders who are there to help. It's all in a positive, family-friendly format with none of the drama that you'll find on social media sites. So learn more about membership and all the other perks of being a member at mcrider.com/member. Till next week, guys, it's Kevin with MCrider. And I'll see you on the road.